But firstly, we're very pleased to say we have Sheryl French, who's a programme director from Cambridge County Council, and she's going to talk about Swaffham Prior, which is a small village just north of Cambridge, and they have a district heating system going in, a community-owned district heating system powered by ground source heat pumps. So Sheryl, if you're happy to start, I'll hand it over to you, and thank you very much.
Morning, everybody. I'm just going to try and share my screen. So I'm just going to get up my presentation. Just bear with me a couple of minutes because it was all here before. Now I'm just trying to find where my presentation's gone.
It's bearing with you, Kayla.
Let me try again. Sorry, everybody.
No, please.
For some reason, I can't find my presentation, which was quite interesting.
Sheryl, if it's helpful, Dave may be ready to do his presentation. Dave,
yeah, that'll help because that's very odd. I had it all ready to share earlier and I can't find it now. So thank you. Yeah, if Dave goes, well, I try and find it.
Great. Dave, are you happy to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm fine. It'll be the same boring talk whether I do it now or a little bit later. So let's go for it. So I'll try and share my screen and see if that works. So we've got others, yeah, me. So we want to do that, don't we? How's that? Can everybody? People see that okay? Oh, you're all mute. Yeah. Okay. Apparently my internet connection is unstable, so that's a really good start, but never mind. So anyway, let's get cracking. So my name's Dave Robertson. I'm Managing Director of Sensible Heat Limited, which I thought was a jolly clever name at the time. This is us, and it seems a bit odd, really. I'll just explain what we do, but we've been going for about 15 years. We're based here in Lewis. And we do heating, ventilating, and air conditioning control systems for posh houses, really. So it's a very high-end residential.
Oh, it sounds as though we've lost the sound, Dave. Completely. Oh no, he's still there. Dave, we can't hear you very well.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so we're a bit of an oddball choice for this talk in a way, because what we do is houses for the stars. You can see that top right-hand one, the picture there, that's David Beckham's house that we did in Holland Park. The one underneath it in the middle there is for the bloke who founded Superdry. It's a big mansion in near Cheltenham. And the bottom one is for Anish Kapoor. It's in Lincoln's Inn Fields in London, lovely house. And we've done loads of Russians and all sorts of nameless oligarchs and what have you. And
sorry to
most of the...
Dave, sorry to interrupt you, but we've lost your screen share.
Oh dear, right, okay. What's happened there then? Hang on a minute. Yeah, I think my Zoom dropped out for a minute. Right, here we go. How's that? Everything but. Yeah. You seeing the screen? Yeah. interested in energy efficiency. But if you like a secret passion of ours, they get energy efficient systems from us, whether they like it. I guess the other benefit is that we see.
I'm really sorry, but we're having problems hearing you. I think it may be a choice between hearing you clearly and sheet and screen sharing.
So I'd like to suggest Cheryl's presentation is ready. So let's start all over again. I'm terribly sorry about this, everyone. Let's start all over again with Sheryl and see if we can sort out some better internet for Dave. Is that all right with everyone? Great.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so yes, welcome everybody. I'm Sheryl French. I'm from Cambridgeshire County Council and I'm the Programme Director for Climate Change and Local Energy Investment. So what I'd like to...
Could you make your screen bigger? You're showing you're not showing the presentation.
Oh. Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm here talking to you today about the collaboration, which is Swaffham Prior Community Heat Project. On the bottom, you'll see a logo, which is the Swaffham Prior Community Land Trust. And it was their original idea that they would like to take their homes in the village of Swaffham Prior off of oil. And they were the ones who kick-started the whole process and approached Cambridgeshire County Council to collaborate with them. So the community have been instrumental in this project. So just to give people a sense of where Swaffham Prior is, on the left-hand side of this map, you see a map of Cambridge, and Swaffham Prior is about 8 miles as the crow flies to the northeast. It's a historic village. It's got more than 50 listed buildings. It's got a number of homes which are part of a housing association. It's got a hill in it as well. It's a village which has got a very mixed bunch of housing. There isn't any large anchor loads in the village. We've got a pub and we've got a school. The rest of it is domestic housing. So when we started the project and we started the collaboration, we were trying to work out, well, what is it we want to achieve in this collaboration with residents? So the most important thing at the time was saying we want to get off of oil and we want to stop fossil fuel burning. And so it was saying we want to reduce our carbon footprint. We also want to try and see how far we can go in terms of decarbonising the whole of the heat and hot water system for residents. So this really gives you a sense of where we're at in terms of reducing our carbon footprint and the amount of energy use that we're going to be potentially generating. So the project is funded through a whole range of investments, and I thought this was a really important slide to share because what you have when you're trying to put together a community project is you're dependent on accessing what I call development grant monies to be able to assess the project as you move forward. What that means is that you have to apply, you have to wait for your application to be assessed, and then you get told you've been awarded the money. But then there's a time lag in terms of getting memorandums of understandings, getting contracts signed. So when you look on the top left-hand side of this funding screen, you know, things started in December 2017. And the final investment decision is going to be planned for this December. So that's a 3-year process of involvement. And so obviously when you go into a community energy project, it's a long haul. It doesn't tend to be a short haul. And so I just wanted to show you how we progressed through the funding. So the Community Land Trust were the ones who approached Rural Energy Fund and managed to get £20,000 to do their first initial feasibility study in the village. And this was also a mechanism to engage with residents to say, you know, are you interested in us doing something or not? And there was strong support for doing something and taking off oil and being more environmentally conscious. And it's that point that the residents or the Community Land Trust approached us at Cambridgeshire County Council. And one of the reasons for approaching us was that to access next stage of funding with the Heat Network Delivery Unit, which is part of government, so in Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department, a local authority needed to apply. So we were very happy to oblige. But actually, the residents were also very clever because they'd identified we had a corporate energy strategy which had said that Cambridgeshire County Council will use its own assets or land assets to help facilitate community energy projects. And what they'd done is identified a farm right next to the village, which would allow us to work together and potentially host an energy centre. So we submitted a bid in December 2018, and we have to have match funding. And this was for working on techno-economic feasibility, so options assessments. We then had a further bid, which was investment point 3. And it's just to show to you that actually there's quite a lot of work on bid writing, and you have to have quite a lot of data to do this process. So, sorry? Okay, so we again needed to do some match funding here, and one of the big things that was coming through from government was that they wanted us to really manage a couple of very big critical risks on investment 3 before they gave us a bigger amount of money to progress the project. And the risk on this project was around, would there be enough heat in the ground, and were the residents really going to sign up? So we had to do a very big piece of work at that point to see if residents were interested or whether they weren't going to sign up, and to see what the heat load was like, or the heat in the ground, whether the quality of the heat was going to support the project. So we're now currently in investment round 5, and we're in the commercialisation phase. We've submitted a planning application, and that's going to be determined next month, hopefully. And we're working towards an investment decision in December. So what is it we're going to try and do? So this is a snapshot of what the village heat network is going to look like. The farm, that is Cambridgeshire County Council's farm, which is the green area with lots of dots in it. And the relationship between the farm and the village. So the farm, which currently has a tenant farmer, and the tenant farmer has worked with us and agreed that we can take this land. There's a barn on this land, and we're going to use the barn to host the energy centre, and we're going to use the field to drill 130 boreholes 200 metres deep to extract heat. We're also going to have an air source heat pump in there, and we're also going to have thermal stores, and I'll show you some pictures of that in a minute. The original plan was to also support the electricity, because you have to use significant levels of electricity for the heat pump, even though it's very efficient. We were going to be putting in some solar panels in the field as well to be able to generate renewable energy. And I'll talk to you about how we've changed that to an even better solution. So that's what we're trying to do. And this is just a quick infographic of what the original barn is going to be changed into as an energy centre. And the idea is that we will also use this as an opportunity to bring school groups or visitor groups to see how you connect a range of technologies together and how they interact and function. So in sort of a little bit more detail, this is what we're trying to do. On the left-hand side of the screen, we're looking to use a ground source heat pump. And as you see, we're going to be drilling 200-metre boreholes and 130 of them. Now, they're about sort of 10-15 centimetres in diameter. You've then, if you move across the infographic, you've got some air source heat pumps. And then the four red boxes are the thermal energy storage. And there's 200 meters cubed, which is a very large amount. And this is effectively to allow us to manage any downtimes, any challenges in the systems where something might go wrong. So you've got a sufficient thermal store. And so we are putting, these are very heavy and significant pieces of kit. If you carry on moving to the right, out of the 4 red boxes, you've got a red line coming out and then going back in as a blue line. We've got 7 kilometres of heat network going through the village. And then we're looking at the 300 plus customer connections. And at the bottom of this infographic, you can see that we're also connecting in the solar energy plant. So I just thought it'd be quite helpful to just show that we've had to work through a lot of challenges on the project. And I'm not going to go through all of them in great detail, but on the left, you see we've had to go through data challenges, technology challenges, engineering and design challenges, and we have brought in a lot of experts to work with us, and that's the beauty of being able to access funding from a heat network delivery unit. Is it means that you can put the best minds that you can buy to the problems that you've got. We've got regulations we've had to work through, obviously significant stakeholder engagement and work with the community, and then there's also quite a few programmatic challenges that we've worked on. So just to give you an example of the type of data challenge, when you have an oil-based community, you're not actually 100% clear on how much oil is used by a home, because what tends to happen is you get 1,200 litres delivered, but you might already have a residual level in your tank. And so you're never quite clear of how much you've got. And your bill is 1,200 litres delivered on March 21st. You know, so we had to try and work out how we were going to get much better, more granular data to support the calculations of, you know, just what size is this energy centre going to look like. So we installed heat meters in a number of houses, trying to look at different archetypes. So, you know, your 4-bedroom listed building, your 2-bedroom more modern 1960s, to be able to get an assessment of just the profile of the demand, as well as sort of the actual demand. We've also had to access other sets of data to be able to help us work through that. So that was one big challenge that I think people don't realise that you might face, is getting good data. The second one was around technology. So one of the things in an oil-based village is you tend to have oil boilers and oil tanks. And you tend to have quite a high temperature heating system. Now, traditionally, you know, I have an air source heat pump in my house, just recently installed, and you're normally working at a much lower temperature compared to the, let's say, your wet heating system, your tertiary system that you've got in the house. So what we needed to do was to try and design a system that fitted with the existing wet systems in people's homes, because otherwise the cost of replacing all the pipework, and new radiators was going to be a cost that the project couldn't bear, but also there'd be it would be a barrier for residents. Bless you, whoever that was. So we've had to really think about what we can deliver and do a lot of market research. And so what we've come up with is a high temperature heat pump, which can work at 75 degrees. And this is really important for residents because actually it minimises the impact as you go into the home. But it is more complex and it's more expensive. It's larger, it's heavier. And sort of deployment hasn't really taken off yet in the UK, but it is well known in Europe. So then the next challenge I just wanted to quickly highlight was around engineering and design. So we'd originally started our journey thinking that we were going to be doing an open loop source ground source heat pump, and we've changed to a closed loop. And partly that was done because when we drilled our first borehole just as a test borehole, when we went down 200 meters, we had some significant clay layers. It's called green sands clay, which meant that one of the challenges we'd have is that our loop would get bunged up with claggy clay, and you'd end up having quite a lot of downtime with maintenance. So that was a really positive thing to find out early on before we'd started anything, was that we had to change to a closed loop system. We also went for this hybrid solution of ground source and air source because that came out as a more cost-effective mechanism. So we're going to be featuring the air source and using the air source more heavily during the summer months, which then allows the ground which the ground source heat pump is installed in to warm up, so that when we extract heat over winter using the ground source heat pump, we don't end up in this position that you end up freezing your ground over time. And that was probably one of our biggest learning lessons here, was that you have to be really careful that how you deploy arrays of vertical ground source heat pumps for community scale projects, that you don't freeze the ground. I've got a few more minutes, I think. So then the other thing around regulations, as example, is we've put in our planning application, which is just being determined. We had to go through an EIA screening process, so environmental impact assessment screening process. And fortunately for this project, we weren't subject to an EIA, because that would have added time, cost, and additional work. But we're in the process now that it's being determined, and we're also having to look at listed building consents. So with a lot of villages, you know, there's pride in what the village looks like. And so there was quite a lot of concern of how you would connect in with a heat network into some of the lovely old buildings. So what we are working together with Historic England and East Cambridgeshire District Council Conservation Officer and the archaeology team at Cambridgeshire County Council is to do, it's a local listed building consent order, which effectively applies to the whole village across all the archetypes of listed buildings, so that we can agree in advance how the access and how that looks into the homes, so that you don't have to submit an application for every single home that connects, which is a listed building, to the local authority, because that would take up a lot of time for everybody, and it's another barrier for people's engagement. Now, you've noticed I've just clicked over stakeholders, because I'm going to come back to that in a minute. One of the other really big problems for projects is, well, how do you make all the revenues stack up for a project? And for this project, we are relying on 3 key areas of mechanism of income. One, that residents sign up. And just so you're aware, we've guaranteed them that this will be less than the price they currently pay for oil. The second thing is we've also guaranteed to them that they won't have to pay to access the project if they sign up before we construct. So what we're trying to do is take a barrier out, which is the ability to pay. So if you have the ability to pay, you might already have taken the opportunity to go and do an air source heat pump on your home. But actually it's a big barrier for many people. But you know, it does mean that we need at least 160 residents or homes to sign up to our project. And a second part of our income is we're looking to access renewable heat incentive. Now, some of you might know that this is closing at the end of March next year. And there are quite a lot of criteria that you have to fulfill to be able to access it. It's a key part of our funding, and we're working very hard to get there in time. There's a big risk that we don't get there, and that's one of the big problems that we're managing at the moment. The other source of income that we're going to be looking at is just around how can we sell the carbon emissions from this project so that we can make the project stack up financially. So where we're at now is we've got technical feasibility established, we've done our designs, we've done techno-economic modelling, we've looked at different options and come up with the option that we think is the most applicable for this village. We've done our planning application, we've done all of our archaeological investigations. We're now in discussion with UK Power Networks around the load that this would connect to the distribution network. And we've been doing a lot of soft market testing with all our supply chains. And so we're currently working on our investment grade proposal so that we can make a financial investment decision by December. Yes, so that just says that. So one of the other benefits of the project is that we have put up a number of air pollution monitors throughout the village, so we can try and see just the air pollution benefit that might come from stopping fossil fuel burning. And the other benefit that we're working on is how do we add some significant more rewilding into sort of the farm that we're taking over, because you can have a ground source heat pump in there, but you know, you can't plough over the top of it because you can't plough deeply. So what is it we can do across the village to support that? And then I just wanted to finish by saying there's a lot of people in the village who are vocal and want to be part of it. There's also a lot of people in the village who are more sceptical. And then there are some people in the village who are absolutely anti the project. And so it's a very difficult balancing act to get a whole community to come forward and support something. And I'm really happy to have sort of a detailed discussion about that later. That's it, I think.
Sheryl, thank you very much.
Is it okay?
Yeah, that was really, really interesting. And we've got some interesting questions coming up as well. So at the end of the three presentations, if we can go back and have a question and answer session, that would be great. And if we can't, if we don't get around to all the questions, we'll save the chat and we'll be sending the questions that we made to the speakers for them to answer on the email at a later date, if that's okay with you. But that was very, very interesting, and thank you very much. So our next speaker is Kayla Ente from BESCO, Brighton and Hove. So Kayla, can I pass over to you? You're on mute at the moment.
She should be unmuted now.
Have you unmuted her?
I'll unmute her.
Okay. I think we're going to unmute you here, Kayla.
Right. We should
right.
hear her.
We can hear you.
That's fine. Apologies. I'm just getting my screen up.
Right.
Let's see.
Well, we could ask the package. Sheryl could answer questions while Kayla does that.
Okay.
Smith had a question for Sheryl. Unless Kayla's about to get in.
I think it is.
Right. So let's see. That should work now. Okay, so
Right. Can
everybody see that now?
That's great, yes. Thank you.
Super. Right, my name is Kayla Ente. I'm the CEO of Brighton and Hove Energy Services Cooperative. And we're a membership cooperative, if you haven't heard of us already, developing community-owned energy projects, and our focus is on renewable heating. It's very, very challenging now to go after Sheryl's presentation because their project is so impressive and ambitious. However, this is just one customer where we've worked over a period of 4 years to completely decarbonize their site. So I'm going to take you through the journey. They're a school in Framfield, and it's a Montessori school, and the governors of this school are very future thinking, and the students are really involved with climate. So they've done a terrific job of demonstrating how you can become zero carbon emissions on a school. They were on oil heating, and they bought this property about 4 years ago, and we've accompanied them on the entire journey. So the first phase was about installing a air source heat pump for the small nursery, which you can see here. We put 27 kilowatts of solar PV on. That was about 10 kilowatts on the nursery building with underfloor heating, so that the small children could play on a heated floor, with LED lighting and loft insulation in the main building. This nursery building was already they built it back from scratch, so we were able to put in insulation, and this building is the main building, and that's where we did the loft insulation in those eaves, and we put the solar on. So the interesting thing about doing renewable energy and energy efficiency, and the whole reason why we're involved in it in the first place, is because we really do believe that you can save from generating your own electricity and saving on your energy. And for this customer, the lifetime savings that they'll get, even paying us back for our upfront finance, was about £50,000, and they're going to be saving 171 tons of CO2 emissions over the life of this work, which is about 20 years. Of course, we all know that the grid is decarbonizing over time, so this figure could be overstated depending on how low we can get the grid to be. The second phase was to replace the existing oil boiler. So we installed a 87 kilowatt ground source heat pump. We had problems in the drilling as well. We had to put in steel casings in the boreholes in order to keep the ground from leaching into the boreholes, which added extra expense to the project. So we had a contingency fund set up anyway, because the way that we do the process is we agree the finances before, and the client signs a contract before we start construction. So we always set a contingency in there, and we were fortunate that the extra costs of the drilling, in the beginning it was going very, very slowly. And so then we're also putting in 11 kilowatts of solar PV to help with the heat pump, and that's additional to the 27 kilowatts that they already have on the site. You can see that they're growing their own food, and the kids learn about agriculture as well, and it's a really beautiful school to be involved with. We estimate that the lifetime savings, again, from the ground source heat pump will be over 1,000 tons of CO2. Again, that depends on how much we decarbonize the grid. But the most important thing for us is that we're going to be taking out that oil tank completely. So they're not going to be using any fossil fuels on this site anymore. I just wanted to talk a little bit about villages as well, because BESCO's strategy is to start pursuing microgrids, looking at small clusters of properties and putting in shared ground loops. As we know, the RHI is going to change, so I'm not sure how sustainable this is going to be in the future. But like Sheryl said, if we can get a price for our carbon emissions savings, if there's some way that maybe community energy groups can work together to put together our carbon emission savings and work at scale, that might be an idea for us to be able to generate some value from our projects together to be able to sell that carbon emission savings. But we definitely feel that the decarbonization of heat is one of the most important issues that faces us as a nation, not only to deliver low carbon heat, but also to deliver affordable heat. And so I just wanted to talk about that for a minute and to discuss to show you the shared ground loops that we're looking at in a village with the clusters of properties. This is 22 homes that we would do on a shared ground loop. We're working on this project right now, and we're hoping to be able to deliver it before the end of the RHI, as Sheryl has said, in the end of March. But we believe that community ownership of heat networks in an ESCO model can be really attractive, and we're going to see if we can get this to work in this village. It's part of a larger plan to install 4 megawatts of solar generation, look at supporting the grid, because grid reinforcement is a really big issue, cost-related issue with heat pumps. Sheryl didn't talk about that, but that's definitely something that needs to be addressed, and probably, I hope we can talk about that afterwards, what we can do in community energy to support the grid, because these low voltage networks are not really fit for purpose for large scale deployment of local heat pumps. And so that's all I wanted to say. Here's that little nursery again, an image on the western side of the building, and the heat pump is on the other side. So maybe later we can talk about this project, and if you have any questions, I'm certainly happy to answer them.
Hi, Kayla. Well, that's great. Thank you very much. And just to reiterate that, you know, that small is beautiful, and quicker and easier to put into effect than you know, the fantastic project at Swaffham Prior, which Sheryl was saying has taken so much time to get to this point. So we've got a few questions for you as well. But now, can I hand over to Dave so he can do his presentation?
Yeah, sure. Let's hope for a bit of a better result this time. I've plugged in my internet into the wall rather than Wi-Fi, so I hope it holds up a bit better. If it doesn't, we've got a plan B. Oops, hold on a minute. See if we're seeing that or not.
Dave, we can see it, but I think your sound has gone again.
Right, okay, that might be problematic. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think it's still slightly, your sound's slightly on.
I'll show my
Dave,
Do you think? So do you think we should show it screen share from your machine, Liz? And yeah, I'll end this then.
Right.
Sorry about that. So can you hear me all right now when I'm not screen sharing?
Yeah, so
Maybe I'll stop. I'll turn the video off. How's that?
yeah,
Okay, can you hear me now?
yeah, and Liz will now share her screen so we can see the presentation.
Okay, that I hope everybody can see that. It's going to be not so good because it's a PDF version, but never mind. Hopefully you can all hear me. Can you give me a thumbs up, Nikki, if you can hear me? Great, lovely. Okay, so here we go again then. So my name's Dave Robinson. I'm MD of Sensible Heat Limited.
We've done the week.
Sorry. I'm MD of Sensible Heat Limited. We're based here in Lewes, if we can have the first slide, Liz, up. And been going about 15 years. And we're a bit of an odd company, perhaps odd at first sight for this kind of forum, because we are very specialist. We do clever heating and cooling controls for expensive houses. And we do it all over the UK, a little bit in Europe. I guess we've done about 1,000 projects in the last 15 years, which is quite a lot for a small firm. Very, very specialist, as I say. So these are a lot of celebrities' homes. That's David Beckham's house there, and in London, and various oligarchs and so on we've worked for in the past. So that seems odd because none of these people are at all interested in energy efficiency, or most of them aren't anyway. However, the buildings are all quite complicated. They're using very much the latest technologies. We've done lots of work with heat pumps, combined heat and power engines, all sorts of things go into these houses because they have to work to a high performance level, and often there are planning reasons why they have to be green, whether the owner wants them to be or not. So we've seen a pretty large selection. So I'm here really not to talk about posh houses, but to talk about the controls themselves, because prior to that business, I was in the building management system business. I worked 10 years for Trend, that you may have heard of, and 10 years for a manufacturer that we started up, spinning out of Trend. So I had 20 years in commercial BMS, building management systems, which are really for commercial buildings, schools, hospitals, supermarkets, all sorts of things. What I've found over the years is that now that we're into this sort of green phase, if you like, everybody tends to focus on the prime mover in the heating scheme, i.e. what's generating the heat. And, you know, we hear a lot about heat pumps of various sorts and different boilers and solar and whatever, but we don't hear a great deal about what's happening in the building itself, the consumers, if you like, of the energy. And whether we could do something about managing the demand for the heat rather than just generating it in an energy efficient way. Couldn't we do something to manage the heat better? Well, the answer is yes, we can, and that's what controls are for. And also just to bear in mind that we tend to focus again on either new builds or major refurbishments of properties where we can change the heating system for something greener. We've still got a huge chunk of buildings in this country. I think there are something like 23 million residential properties, goodness knows how many commercial buildings that have already got systems in them that are not time expired. We can't change them all overnight. So is there a quick win we could have to fix a lot of these buildings and make them a bit more efficient than they are at the moment, but without changing all the plant? I think there are opportunities there. So next slide, please. Just a little bit of history here, because I've been doing this for quite a while. And back in the 80s, we were just coming out of an energy crisis then. Energy was very expensive, and lots of organizations invested heavily in teams of people to understand that and to manage energy better. And local authorities all had quite big energy management departments. Lots of organisations, private organisations, for instance, we worked a lot with Sainsbury's back in the 80s. They had a whole department just looking at energy in their stores. And we in the controls company had a whole team of people working with them to try and reduce energy usage in supermarkets, because they had a big store building program in those days. Lots of things happened after that. Energy got cheaper, utilities got deregulated, which actually meant that energy managers, the ones that were left, were really spending a lot of their time doing the best tariff deals rather than in putting in technology into buildings to save energy. I'm sorry if there are energy managers here who think I'm maligning them. Not at all. They were doing their job, but it changed things. So that's kind of what happened. And so we lost a lot of skills in the industry, a lot of people, a lot of critical mass of people who knew about using controls to save energy. And that's been displaced largely by manufacturers who are selling equipment, like heat pump manufacturers. So they're selling their heat pump. It has its own controls on board, which may or may not be the ultimate solution for the overall project. They're looking at their little bit of it. So it's very much plant-centered these days. And I'd like to challenge that and say, well, I think we can do maybe better than that. Next slide, please. So how can we use controls to save some energy? I mean, the first thing is to control the space more.
I'm in.
Oh, I don't know what happened there.
I think somebody is not on mute. Could everyone just check that they've muted? Apart from Dave, obviously. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, we need to control the space temperature more accurately. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. We can zone the building up, because often buildings are not used. All the building is not used all of the time. Now that's not true of maybe a school or something like that. It's certainly true of a house, and it's true of buildings between those two extremes, I guess. When the building's not in use, we need to make sure it's controlling, not turned off, but because you're going to get fabric damage if the building gets too cold and damp and so on. But we can shut down the building, the temperature in the building, and save some energy that way. We also need to make sure that the plant only runs when it needs to run, and that's when the space needs some heat. And that plant is running at its maximum possible efficiency. I'll touch on that again a bit later. So some of this stuff is well trodden, but may be forgotten about. Some of the techniques, some of the new technology that we've had in the last 20 years has meant that we can do new stuff that we couldn't do back in the 80s. And I'll touch on that as well. So next slide, please. Yeah, so this business about temperature control. If we have a crude thermostat, which is an on-off device, I'm too cold, turn on, I'm too hot, turn off, you will get this kind of temperature cycling around the desired temperature that you want. Now, the problem with that is that you will then see the troughs more than the peaks as an occupant, and you'll tend to set the whole system to a higher temperature so that you don't get cold. And that means that all the peaks are areas where we're wasting energy because we're hotter than we need to be. And there's an old, God knows where the stat came from, but it's been around for donkey's years, that very, very roughly, rule of thumb, a degree over temperature wastes maybe 10% of your energy bill. If you can reduce your set points by a degree, you're going to save roughly 10%. Now, of course, that doesn't stack up all the way down to zero. It's not a linear thing, but it's not a bad rule of thumb for roughly how much you can save a lot of energy by just a degree. It's not very much in terms of temperature reduction, but it saves a whole lot of energy. So better temperature control. We need better devices rather than crude thermostats that are controlling things, and we need to be much finer in our granularity of control. So that we need more thermostats, basically. Just moving on here to the issue of making plant run efficiently. Now, we've heard a little bit about heat pumps. coefficient of performance, COP. That's the right-hand curve there. And that's a curve for a, in this case, a Mitsubishi EcoDan heat pump, which is a pretty common air-sourced heat pump that does hot water as well, often, which, as we've heard, is the Achilles heel of the heat pump, because you can see that the coefficient of performance drops off quite a lot as you increase the flow temperature coming out of the heat pump. And that varies again on an air source heat pump. It varies with outside air as well. So the coefficient of performance, just to remember what that means, it's a sort of efficiency. It's 1 over efficiency, in fact. And when you get down to a COP of 1, then you might as well be on immersion heater or electric resistance heating, because it means every kilowatt of energy going in, electrical energy, you get 1 kilowatt out. And it's only when you're up at the 2s and 3s that they start getting useful, because you're getting a multiplier on the electrical power. So that's true. But if you look at the boiler issue on the left there, that also boilers need to be running cool, especially if they're going to condense. And that's what the knee in the curve there is all about. You see where the slope changes radically depending on the fuel. The bottom one is gas, so that has a condensing temperature. The flue gases have a temperature of 54 degrees, I think it is, for natural gas. And what it's saying is, if we can get boilers to condense, then the flue gases to condense, then we're recovering the latent heat that's in the flue gases, all the stuff that would normally go up the chimney. We're recovering the heat from that, the latent heat of condensation, and that helps the efficiency enormously. So somehow we've got to get the water temperatures down, and that's tricky, especially with regard to domestic hot water. As we heard a little bit earlier, it's a problem because your domestic hot water that you use in your taps needs to be at 55, 60 degrees or something like that, at which point you're getting poor efficiencies out of any of these systems. So we need to mitigate that. One way we can do that is with weather compensation on the heating. If you go to that slide, thanks. This is a well-worn technique, and basically you can reduce the flow temperature going out from your boiler plant in mild weather. That's what it's all about. Because if you think about it, your boiler is going to be sized for when it's really cold outside, and the boiler will be running at full chat in order to heat the building. When you're mild outside, say it's 10 degrees outside, you're going to want, you only want maybe half the flow temperature in order to you want half the amount of heat, let's say. And so you have a slope, and you can reduce the flow temperature going out, and hence the return temperature coming back to the boiler. Now, that's usually traditionally done with an outside sensor. We can now use the web data for perhaps more accurate temperature measurement, because you know, that gives you a trend. Some systems now use some prediction to tell what's going to happen next with regard to outside temperature. But certainly we need some sort of control. Some heat pumps do this, but again, and some boilers do this, but they tend to be boiler centric, and sometimes that's compromised by the system designed downstream of the boiler, because you've got some underfloor heating, some radiators, other things to heat as well, and that tends to be problematic. So you may need to strap external controls onto the system to get the maximum efficiency out of things. Next slide, please. The other technique, just to blind you with a horrible graph there, but ignore that. The takeaway from this is that weather compensation is a bit of a blunt instrument, because it ignores what's going on inside the house or the building. It's only looking at the outside weather. And you know, you might have a sunny day and suddenly you don't need so much heating because the sun's warmed up the rooms. Even though the outside temperature is low. So you have a thing called room influence or load compensation, and that uses sensors in the house or in the building to affect the weather compensation curve. So if it's warm in the house, you'd maybe reduce the flow temperature. If it's still cold in the house, you'd boost it up. Now, again, external controls can do a better job than perhaps most of the systems that only use a single internal sensor, because where would you put that sensor? It's a big building and you've got maybe one sensor to sense the whole of it. We can do a bit better than that now with controls by putting multiple sensors in the building and taking an aggregate from them. Next slide, please. Zoning the building. Traditionally, this has been a very difficult and expensive thing to do because, say a school, for instance, that typically is one zone. So the boiler turns on and it's feeding all of the radiators in the whole building at once, irrespective of how hot or cold they are, and irrespective of whether those rooms are being used or not, everything gets heated. And the best you can do, usually with conventional technology, is to put some thermostatic valves on the radiators. But typically, you know, buildings, even schools, are not used, all the rooms are not all used all of the time. And in other buildings, very much so used at different times. So if we could zone the building up and be able to shut rooms down that we're not using, we can get substantial energy savings. Now, as I say, traditionally that's been expensive because you've got to cut valves into pipes, run loads of wires, it becomes uneconomic. But a system like this one here that we use in our business from Honeywell, it's a wireless system. These little gizmos at the bottom sit on, so you take the conventional thermostatic head off your radiator valve, just unscrew it, and you screw one of these things on instead. It's battery powered, it's wirelessly linked to the thing at the top, the touchscreen unit at the top. And now we can set times and temperatures for every room in the building separately. So we can shut down areas that are not being used. The other thing about these sort of systems is that they give you lots of sensors. Every room now has its own sensor, so it's giving its own feedback to the central plant in the way that I talked about. So we can do room influence on a much finer granularity, much more accurately. Next slide, please. That's the kind of user interface that you get. And as I say, the takeaway point here really is that now we've got lovely clear touch screens with easy to use. Everybody knows how to use a smartphone. That's made a huge difference to user interfaces generally, because everybody's familiar with them, and now they're not frightened by looking at something like this. It's pretty obvious how it works. You start pressing buttons and work it out for yourself generally, and you don't even need to look at the book. So easier. Just move on now to the summary. I'm conscious we're running out of time. So I guess my points here are that let's not neglect the fact that you can do more with, if you like, overlaid control systems. We need to look at the whole building rather than just the plant room of the building in order to deliver the best energy savings. We can apply it to existing buildings without ripping out the main plant. Ultimately, these plants all need to be changed, but right now we've got a huge building stock with existing plant in it. We should be able to do something about that quite quickly. The advent of wireless technology has helped in terms of installation costs and the user interface thing as well, with clear touchscreens and smartphones helps us get the best out of this. I think that's me done.
Dave, thank you very much. That's fantastic and really, really interesting. So I'd just like to say thank you to all three of our speakers, and we'd now like to have a question and answer session. I think, can we start with Sheryl? There was lots of questions for her very interesting project, but perhaps we can, I think Michael Levins asked a question first of all. So Michael, do you want to ask your question, and then perhaps Sheryl can answer that? Are you still there, Michael?
I'm still here, yeah. But I think I've forgotten what the question was actually.
It was about who did the study, I think.
Oh yeah, I think someone else answered me privately.
Okay.
It was Voyagers, wasn't it, or the consultants? Is that right?
Yes, so we as Energies and Services did the techno-economic assessment. So someone called Miles Messenger, and I'm happy to put you in contact with him if you'd like.
Yes, please. Yeah.
I think, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Yeah.
I think Liz had a question, so I just passed my laptop to her.
I just have a question. I'm sorry to jump in, but because Dave's been talking about heating controls, I just wonder what our other two speakers think, and if they've included heating controls in their projects, and if they see there would be a place for them or not. I'd just like, it'd be interesting, the three of you having a bit of a conversation about that. Yeah.
I mean, Dave's, measuring efficiency and being efficient through controls is really important. And I have to say, it's a challenge we have on our project. So, which is the energy efficiency of the house. So we're trying to access green homes grants for those homes where additional, let's say, energy efficiency or changing from existing heating system that they might be on to a wet system so that they can connect. But yes, we're trying to put forward grant regimes for people to access to do those.
Thank you. Kayla, have you got anything to add? I don't know if this is something that you've looked into for your projects.
Yeah, all of our projects have heating controls in place. Either it's just a simple thermostat, or part of what we do for every project is assess the thermal efficiency of the building. So we never just install renewable energy. We will look at installing energy efficiency as well. So for our heat network project that we're looking at shared networks, the first thing we're doing is improving the thermal efficiency of those buildings, because it's an old village. Some of the properties are quite old, and some of the EPCs are very low.
Yeah, thank you. And Dave, have you got anything else to add to this?
No, not really. I think it's a challenge, and I think that really I kind of feel that the controls industry that I'm a part of has fallen down on the job a bit here, if you see what I mean, compared to how we were in the 1980s, when I think, as I said, there was a critical mass going on there, and you felt like there was an understanding as to how important it was, and an inertia behind it. I think that's been lost largely and overtaken by, flagship technologies. Everybody knows about heat pumps in terms of in the general public in the general population, and solar thermal, solar PV. Everybody's heard those words and they understand what it means, and the benefit. Whereas I think the benefits of better controls are a little bit more quantitative and a bit less easy to see, first off, because they're pretty deeply technical things that you're doing, and people glaze over. So how do you argue that one thermostat's better than another? It's tricky. So yeah, that's kind of what I think, is that it would be great if we could have a bit more awareness in the industry.
Could I just add, there was a really good question, Liz, from someone called Danny Lee. Well, there have been loads of good questions, but it was something that actually we've had to work quite strongly in the community around. So his question was around effectively carbon accounting.
Yes, yeah.
Danny, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, it's Danny here. Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a purist, so I never lose sight of what we're all about. And surely, in most people's minds, we have a carbon or a decarbonizing challenge. Net zero by 2050. I would say it's 2030, and of course that's pretty ambitious. And all the thermal efficiency and comfort of life is very important. So is the running costs. But does that really always trump life cycle carbon, i.e. the operational carbon savings and the embodied embedded carbon savings? So in other words, if I'm buying a product and it's made in Timbuktu in the most inefficient and unpleasant way, is that really a good thing to have? And how do the experts that have just given us their talks consider this when they put their projects together and choose their products and their system layouts and so on?
If I'd really like to pick this up, because actually we've had quite a big debate in Swaffham prior around this, because what we've put together in terms of, let's say, tons of CO2 saved is around effectively the operational costs. So the comparison of oil being burnt in boilers in Swaffham prior. And one of the challenges that we had sort of levied at us was, well, you're also needing to look at the consumptive costs. So the way global accounting works is that you tend to look at your territorial costs. So where something's burnt is where the carbon is effectively counted. So if someone is burning dirty electricity in Japan, making my commercial air source heat pump, that dirty carbon is accounted over there. And then who accounts for the transport of that? So the big challenge we had with this in terms of our project, because we have considered it, is that we would have had to have done an assessment around, the total life cycle cost on extraction of oil and sourcing where the oil was coming from, compared to the products that we were buying, which are generally in more developed countries with better carbon accounting systems. We didn't go into a total life cycle analysis on embodied carbon or on consumptive carbon, i.e. happening somewhere else in the world. But what we do know is that overall, our assessment was that if you take out the fact that extracting oil, producing it as a product and putting it to the market was a dirtier process than the process of actually producing the ground source heat pump and air source heat pump. So yes, it's a very difficult, detailed discussion that needs to be had. I agree.
Yeah, I think it's an ethical one. And, as the UK doesn't manufacture as much as it used to, we're a service industry. So almost everything we use is imported. Yep. And understanding that supply chain, as you say, that life cycle, cost, I think is really important. And Dave was talking about a whole bunch of gizmos and so on. So perhaps a question for Dave, I may come up with a supplementary, is what is the payback on all these gizmos? I mean, is that something that is uppermost in your mind? And is there a simple formula that you use and guidance, etc.?
Gizmos, yes, interesting word. Slightly pejorative.
Yeah, sorry. Slightly biased. More stuff, more cost.
Just denigrating my whole working.
Apologies for that.
Yeah. No, I think first of all to say that the Honeywell product that we use and all the other peripheral product that we use in our business is all made either here in the UK or in Germany. Everything's made here in Europe. I mean, whether the bloody resistors and capacitors and things that are on the circuit boards are made in the Far East, they probably are. But the main bulk of the manufacturing is in Europe. And quite a lot of it is in Scotland, actually, which is still part of the country at the moment, which is great. So which I'm quite proud of, and it is quite deliberate. However, in terms of payback, it's not a calculation that we do as part of our business at the moment, because none of my customers are interested in the payback at all. They're all rich people, but in general terms, the payback is probably of the order of 3, 4, 5 years. It very much depends on the particular mix of product that you need to do your building. But certainly for houses, we did the calculation a few years ago where we were selling more product to, if you like, ordinary people instead of oligarchs, and then the calculation came in a little bit better than, for instance, solar thermal, which is in itself quite an investment. I've got it in my house, or at least I've got half of it. I've got the tank, I haven't got the array on the roof yet, but one day I might have, who knows. But that's a significant investment and quite a lengthy payback. And we reckon that the application of zonal controls in the house is probably better than that. So yeah, it's commensurate with many of the other things that have been talked about, and crucially, so much easier to do. You know, you can slap one of these things in a day without touching a spanner, if you see what I mean.
Sure.
So that's my point really. Is yes, I agree. It's very important to have things ethically sourced, but we've tried quite hard to do that.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
Now, in terms of years, Dave, what payback time?
As I said, probably 3, 4, 5 years. Depends on just how much you have to spend to do it. It's variable.
For a 3-bedroom house with, say, 6 radiators.
You want to quickly, I don't know. It's in that order.
That seems very short, to be honest.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Well,
yeah, I'd like to see the numbers.
Yeah, all right. Well, maybe one day I'll get around to doing them. But I mean, I have to say it depends hugely on how you use the thing, because that's the other part of control systems, is how you use them. It's quite possible to put a control system in, wind everything up to maximum and save absolutely nothing at all. You know, it relies on the user and also your life patterns. So, you know, if you had a house with 3 bedrooms in it and there's only one person living in the house, and they're diligent about time scheduling and running it as cool as possible, you're going to save a lot of energy. But it's quite possible to save nothing at all. So yeah, it's very much down to the user as well.
Yes, that's very interesting. Has anyone else got any comments about this this aspect? I've got something.
The whole project, or the aspect of energy, say ethical sourcing.
The life cycle carbon and embedded carbon.
No, I think I've worked for Honeywell actually, and I've also worked in the oil and gas industry and in renewable energy. It's interesting when people talk about carbon and they look at oil and gas, they don't actually consider the whole life cycle of the exploration and development and extraction of it, which is huge, and the impact on the planet. They just tend to look at the emissions from burning the stuff, but actually the emissions associated with, as what I just said, is huge. And Danny makes a great point, but the offset is quite interesting when you consider the whole life cycle of both aspects of energy.
There was Liz is telling me that there's another question that Danny asked. Do you want to ask that question now, Danny? About
which one was that? I think I asked several. I can't remember.
Shared heat managed for the cost purchase share of the heat.
Oh yeah, so I was very interested in your shared ground loop with 22 homes, and I just wondered, with these heat meters, how accurate are they? I mean, is it something that residents feel comfortable with? Because everybody's taking a share of the shared heat.
Well, I presume that they're fairly accurate because there's a track record with heat meters. We've been doing the renewable heat incentive for a number of years and using the heat meters to measure the renewable heat associated with that. But, this is all speculative. We're going to have to do a trial, and unfortunately, we're pressured for time because of the government's stopping the non-domestic RHI. So it will be really interesting to see the data that comes out, comparing the heat load calculations that we do up front to the actual heat that's used by these residents. Because also one of the characteristics of these rural villages is that people are used to living in fairly cold and drafty homes. And so to rock their world and change them into warm, comfortable homes, it should be very interesting to see the impact on how they use the heat. That's a very good question, Danny. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your answer.
Is it? I don't know if everyone can hear me. I was quite like to come in. But I was very interested in that last point. My name is David Brown. I own a company called PSW. We're a consultancy business, an engineering consultancy business. And I'm very much involved in the world of measurement, particularly heat, using heat meters. It's not the only thing we do. I'm very much involved in the design of these networks, community networks, district-wide networks, from a technical point of view. And I have a particular interest in the measurement of it. I'm a little bit nerdy in that respect. And I tend to deal with exactitudes when I do this. So it was a very interesting point that was made. How accurate are they? If I was to bring the last 10 years of doing this, I'm afraid I'd have to put a question mark over it all as to the data that we all have access to from these things. Can it be relied upon? And the answer, I'd have to say, yes, but not yes. Even with the accuracy that is claimed with some of for the meters, and I'm not picking on any manufacturer or anything like that. I've seen them fail so many times for all sorts of different reasons, and it causes so many problems, not least for the heat supplier, because generally he's left holding a bill that he can't recover the money from the various residents because they say you're inaccurately billing me, for example, or I don't believe what the reading is saying, I wasn't here when you said I've used it, and lots and lots of different reasons. So there's a whole question in my mind, and I know it's probably only small in the big scheme of things, but when you're relying on these heat networks to perform the way we are expecting them to perform, the measurement of them is so absolutely critical. Firstly, for the efficiency of the whole thing from beginning to end. I'm talking about from where the boilers or the CHP or whatever it is that's your prime mover, down to Mrs. Smith at the other end and the furthest point on the system, who's only there for 6 months of the year and receives a bill, and the people who are the network operators, who sometimes have heat agreements that they have to adhere to, who just simply can't reconcile the costs. The plant and equipment doesn't run to the efficiency that it should, and therefore there's all sorts of losses that occur, not having enough metering, or having metering of the right type, are all, if I've learned anything working with all the different networks that I work with, once it's up and running, I would have to say it's probably one of the single most critical things because so many people rely on it. So I thought that was a very, very good question, not least because I'm involved in it, but I see it firsthand. If you imagine, I don't know, the last 10, 12 years when all these district schemes are coming, communal schemes are now coming in, I'm involved in lots of designs where they're done. Early schemes simply did not have enough metering on. I don't think it was a recognised form of metering, but I don't think people quite realised the significance of the losses that occurred, how you need to look at that data to analyse its performance. It's getting better moving forward, but how we use this data, its reliability, which is one of the biggest things I'm involved with at the moment, is very questionable. It's very questionable. That's not to say it's wrong, I'm just saying it's very unreliable. And too many people make decisions based upon unreliable data.
David, thank you very much for that. That's really interesting. We're now a bit short of time, so we'd like to move on and perhaps have 2 more questions from people. I think Paul Shriver's asked about how much land was needed for 5 dwellings, how many boreholes. I don't know.
Yeah, can I expand on that? I'm part of Greener Henley and the Chiltern Energy, Chiltern Hills Community Energy. In Henley, you can imagine land is a premium. I was just wondering if you had a group, say in a cul-de-sac of 5 houses that wanted to install a loop, how much additional land would you need to do that? And could you incorporate it within people's shared gardens, for example, or would you need land on the side of it? Kayla?
Yeah, so there are some housing associations that have done heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, in the back gardens of their properties. usually it's 1 to 2 boreholes per property. And I believe that the boreholes must be about 10 meters apart. If anybody has better information on that, please say.
No, yes, I'd say that's probably about right. Obviously, it depends how big the house is and the heat loss of the house as to how many boreholes you'd need. And I can't remember how many boreholes you need per kilowatt of heating.
So we're saying for 5 houses, you'd need 10 boreholes with 10 meters apart in a grid, at best.
Yeah, and that issue that Sheryl brought up with the freezing of the land, that's really fascinating. I think that, you know, if that needs to be considered as part of that model, you know, that would be important. That's something that I wasn't aware of. So thank you, Sheryl, for that.
It's okay.
And then there's another question. Thank you for that. And there was another question from Matt Jones about regulatory barriers. I don't know if Matt's still on and would like to ask the question. From Zero Carbon Compton. I think he's still here. Are you here, Matt? No, perhaps not. Well, yeah, I don't. He's not. He's still on. Yeah, perhaps he's left to make a cup of tea or something. So we're into the last kind of 6 minutes. So I'm just going to open the floor and ask if anyone has one last question to ask our 3 panelists, and then I think we'll close for today. So if anyone wants to put their hand up or to shout out a question.
I have one.
Paul, hi.
Right. Yeah, it's fantastic work that I see being done in Cambridge. You did mention objections, and of course.
Hi, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Paul.
Hi. Sorry, I got.
No, that's okay. Would you like to ask your question, Matt?
Yeah. So sorry.
Oh, right.
I was really interested in the panel's views on regulatory barriers around, particularly things like heat networks or local electricity supply. And a comment on the local electricity bill. So what the current plans are within the current framework of regulation and where we might get to and how that could unlock things, because it seems quite challenging at the moment for local communities to run and own these types of systems.
Okay, so there's a couple of issues here that I've been working on, Matt. So if you're wanting to sell, obviously, as a community, your challenge is that when you access the distribution network, you have a whole range of charges, and effectively to supply your next door neighbour ends up being a cost that you can't bear as a project. So your challenge is around how do you supply directly. So some of the project work that we've been doing in Cambridgeshire has been around direct supply to commercial customers to be able to make some projects stack up financially. I'm following the electricity bill discussion to understand how they're going to change a system which they currently have to allow community groups to sell to customers to be able to make your projects to stack up in terms of viability. So yeah. I'm interested in anybody else who's got any insights there.
Kayla, do you want to speak?
On an electricity basis, we've really been exploring for the last 2 years how we can do behind the meter sharing, so to get a lot around the regulation. I think we're close to cracking it in one location, but yeah, like Sheryl said, it will be very interesting to see what they come up with in the electricity bill. For heat, I'm not aware of any regulatory barriers because it's just pretty much the heat trust that we need to comply with. And I think that the big issue is going to be what's going to happen with the commercial sector once they make this change to the non-domestic RHI. I think it's frightening for the nation because like we all know, renewable heat and transitioning our communities from fossil fuels in the heat supply is super important, and the non-domestic RHI is very important in that aspect. So I think that's going to be one of our biggest challenges, to keep these projects commercially viable once the commercial non-domestic RHI is gone.
Thanks, Kayla, for that. I'm afraid we have run out of time. So I'm going to say thank you very much to everybody for coming today, and thank you for all your questions. Sorry, Paul and Mike, I know you wanted to ask questions. Do feel free to put them quickly into the chat if you've got anything else to say. And just on the chat, you can save it. If you go to the bottom of the chat and click the 3 little dots, it'll come up with save chat. So, you know, it'd be interesting to hear your questions. We'll just leave that open for five minutes or so, if you want to put anything in there, and then we can send that round to our speakers and come back to you if you've got any questions. So thank you everybody for coming, and we hope to see you again on the 15th of October at 10 o'clock for our next masterclass, and then we'll be into the autumn by then, so we'll be starting to think more about turning our heating on. So thank you very much everybody, and goodbye.